Charlotte Beresford stepped down from the coach at Wycombe Hall on a Tuesday morning in late October. And the cold hit her before anything else. The particular cold of the Cotswolds in autumn, carrying wood smoke and the smell of frost on gravel, and something underneath both that she could not name. She was wearing her plain gray traveling dress, the one she wore to all new positions, because it was serviceable and said nothing about her. The agency letter was in her gloved hand, folded to the address panel, and she had read that address a dozen times over 2 days of coach travel without once connecting it to a name. She was tired. She was always tired at the start of a new placement, in the specific way of someone who had learned to sleep lightly and wake carefully and carry herself with the kind of stillness that made employers comfortable. She had been doing this for 3 years. She was good at it. She stood on the gravel drive and looked up at the stone facade of the hall and told herself she was good at it. And then the front door opened, and the housekeeper came out to receive her, and Charlotte followed her into the entrance hall, and the cold followed her in. The entrance hall was long and high-ceilinged, the fire in the grate not yet caught to any warmth. Charlotte stood beside it and removed her gloves and looked at the room. Stone floors, a wide staircase, 2 doors at the far end, both closed. The housekeeper said she would fetch tea and disappeared through a side passage, and Charlotte was left alone with the agency letter in her bare hands and the smell of beeswax and cold ash. She heard the door before she heard him. Boot heels on marble, a particular unhurried stride, and the sound of a voice mid-sentence, speaking to someone over its own shoulder. The door at the far end of the hall opened, and Adam Wycombe walked in. He stopped. Behind him, the steward who had been receiving his instructions paused in the doorway for exactly 2 seconds, read the room with the accuracy of a man long trained to read rooms, and retreated. The door closed. The housekeeper returned from the passage, carrying a tea tray, saw their faces, and stopped in the doorway to the side passage, with the tray held at an angle that suggested she had considered setting it down and leaving. Charlotte looked down at the agency letter in her hands. She looked at the address printed at the top. She looked up at Adam Wycombe, who was standing 12 feet away from her in his own entrance hall. And she understood several things in the space of a single breath. That the address she had read a dozen times and never connected to a name was the address she had spent 3 years not thinking about. That the agency had placed her here, and that whatever her next action was, it would define the following months of her life. She asked him, in the precise tone of a woman who has understood that her life has been arranged without her consent for the 2nd time, whether His Grace would prefer she withdraw her acceptance now or after she had met the Duchess. Adam's jaw moved once. Then he said, in a voice that had recovered almost entirely, that the Duchess was expecting her. Charlotte put her gloves in her coat pocket, tucked the agency letter into her bag, and went upstairs. The housekeeper showed her to the Duchess's room, a large south-facing room that smelled of lavender water, and the particular warmth of a fire kept burning through the night. The woman propped against the pillows was younger than Charlotte had expected, perhaps 30, with dark eyes and a quality of attention that Charlotte recognized immediately as the kind of intelligence that did not require announcement. Helena Wycombe had set aside her book before Charlotte crossed the threshold. She was watching Charlotte with an expression that was not sympathy and was not appraisal, and was not the particular performance of graciousness that wealthy women sometimes offered to women in service. It was something closer to interest. "Miss Beresford," Helena said, "please sit down. I dislike conversations conducted at a height differential." Charlotte sat. "Where did you lodge in Bath?" Helena asked. It was not the question Charlotte expected. She said she had taken a room in the upper town, near the circus, in a house kept by a widow who let rooms to working women. "And do you find the work isolating?" Helena asked. Charlotte considered the question honestly, which was not something she was often invited to do. She said that she found it solitary rather than isolating. There was a distinction, she said, between a solitude that was chosen and one that was imposed by circumstance. "Yes," Helena said, "there is." She paused. "Do you read aloud with pleasure, or only as a duty?" "With pleasure," Charlotte said, "although I've learned to be selective about what I read aloud and what I read to myself. Some books are diminished by a voice." Helena looked at her for a moment. Then she said, "I think we shall do very well." By evening, Charlotte had unpacked her one trunk into the small room off the east corridor. A narrow room with a good window and a writing desk she recognized immediately as better than anything she had been given in 3 years of service. And she sat on the narrow bed in the lamplight with the agency letter in her hands, the address printed at the top of the page, reading it again. Wycombe Hall, Gloucestershire. She had read it a dozen times. She had never once thought of him. She folded the letter, placed it inside her journal, and put out the lamp. Charlotte wrote to the agency the following morning, before Helena's first reading session, at the small desk in her room. She kept the letter brief. She cited a personal conflict she did not specify, and requested immediate reassignment to any available placement. She sealed it herself and gave it to the footman for the morning post. And then she went to Helena's room and read aloud from a volume of Italian travel essays for 1 hour and 20 minutes, while Helena lay with her eyes half closed and her breathing visible in the slight rise and fall of her chest. The agency's reply arrived 4 days later. Charlotte read it standing at the desk, still in her morning dress. The letter was not unkind. It was practical. The Duchess of Wycombe, it explained, had personally requested Miss Charlotte Beresford by name, not by the agency's recommendation, not from a general list, and had paid a full year's fee in advance. Withdrawing from a placement without cause, the letter continued, would void Charlotte's professional reference from the agency, which was the only professional reference she possessed. She read that sentence twice. Then she folded the letter into the back of her journal, next to the agency placement letter, and sat for a moment with her hands flat on the desk. The reference was not decorative. Without it, she could not secure another position. Without a position, she had 17 shillings and 4 pence in a locked box under the bed, a trunk of serviceable clothing, and a surname she was no longer entitled to use in any room that mattered. She went to Helena's room. Helena did not mention the agency. Charlotte did not mention it either. She read from the travel essays, and Helena listened, and at the end of the session, Helena said she slept better when someone was in the room. Charlotte stayed until Helena's breathing steadied into sleep. She told herself this was the work, and she was capable of the work. And the man she had seen in the entrance hall was not the man she had once thought she knew. He was the employer she had contracted with, and the arrangement was professional, and she would conduct herself accordingly. She crossed paths with Adam twice that week, once in the corridor outside Helena's room, where he came to speak with the physician about a change to the Tuesday schedule, and once at the foot of the staircase, where he was reviewing a list of estate matters with his steward. On both occasions, they exchanged only what Helena's care required: the physician's visit time, the list of medicines. Charlotte kept her eyes on the paper in her hand, or on Helena's door, or on the middle distance that was not his face. She did not look at his face for longer than the sentence demanded. 6 weeks settled into a pattern that Charlotte had established on the second day, and the pattern held. Helena's room in the morning, the walled garden when the weather permitted Helena to be moved, reading aloud in the afternoon, medicines at the prescribed hours. Adam was absent from the East Wing. Charlotte understood without being told that he had organized his household routine to avoid her, and she had organized hers to make that avoidance easy. And between them, they had produced a household that functioned without ever requiring them to occupy the same room. Helena, meanwhile, was unexpectedly easy to love. Charlotte had not anticipated this. She had anticipated a woman who was ill and frightened and in need of management, and she had prepared herself for that, for the particular work of sitting with someone who needed to be managed through their own fear. Helena required none of this. She was unsentimental about her own dying in a way that Charlotte found, against all expectation, restful. She laughed at small things. A passage in the travel essays that described a Florentine innkeeper with a talent for strategic misunderstanding. A cat that had taken to sitting on the window ledge of the East Corridor and regarding the household with an expression of mild contempt. She asked Charlotte questions about Bath that had nothing to do with sympathy or charity, and everything to do with genuine curiosity. About the widow who kept the lodging house, about the women Charlotte had worked for, about what it was like to arrive at a new house and read the room before anyone had spoken to you. Charlotte found herself talking to Helena about her 3 years in service, in a way she had not talked to anyone. Not because Helena asked, but because Helena listened without arranging her face into pity. There was no performance in Helena's attention. She remembered every answer Charlotte gave and returned to them later, sometimes days later, with a follow-on question that made Charlotte realize she had been heard more precisely than she'd intended. Helena also never mentioned Adam, except in the third-person, practical sense. Adam has arranged for the physician to come Tuesdays. Adam will be in the North Field most of the morning. Charlotte absorbed this. It was a form of courtesy, she understood, and she accepted it as such. Then one evening Adam joined them for supper in Helena's room, the first time the three of them had sat together. And the meal was conducted in careful, cordial sentences about the estate, the coming frost, a letter from Helena's mother in Dorset. Charlotte kept her eyes on Helena. She spoke when Helena drew her into the conversation and was quiet when Helena spoke to Adam. And she ate everything on her plate because she had learned long ago that women in service who did not eat at table were women who did not last. Helena kept her eyes on both of them. It was close to midnight, 3 weeks into the 6, when Charlotte came downstairs to the library for the volume of Cowper she had left on the reading table that afternoon. She had been in bed for an hour and could not settle, and she had decided that the book was the reason, which was not entirely true, but was a reason she could act on. Adam was already in the library. He was standing at the window with a glass he had not drunk from, looking out at the frost-edged garden, and he did not hear her come in because she was wearing her indoor shoes and the carpet was thick. She saw him before he saw her. She turned immediately to leave. "Charlotte." He said her name the way a man says a word he has been holding in his mouth for a long time. Not carefully, not with preparation, but with the specific weight of something that has been kept back too long to be controlled. She stopped at the door. Her hand found the frame. She did not turn. The fire was low. The room smelled of coal and old paper and the remains of whatever he had been drinking before he set the glass down. She could hear him breathing. "I'll attend your wife with every care I possess," she said. She kept her voice low and steady, the voice she used when she needed to say something that mattered without permitting it to crack. "I will not embarrass either of us by breaking the contract early. I have no intention of leaving before my time is served." She heard him shift his weight. She heard him begin to speak. "What I require from you," she said before he could, "is silence, not courtesy. Not explanation. Not acknowledgement of anything that existed before this house. Silence. That is the only arrangement I will accept. He did not reply. She left. She went back upstairs and lay on the narrow bed in the dark and did not sleep for a long time. And when she finally slept, it was because her body made the decision without consulting her. The following week, Helena had a particularly bad night. The coughing that came in waves through the small hours, the difficulty drawing breath between them, the fever that climbed toward morning and then broke in a sweat that left her gray and wrung out against the pillows. Charlotte sat with her through all of it, through the medicines and the cool cloths and the long silences between the coughing, through the particular 2 o'clock darkness that is the hardest hour to sit in, and into the gray edge of dawn when Helena finally fell into something that was not sleep exactly, but was rest. And Charlotte fell asleep in the chair by the bed without intending to. Still in her day dress, her hair half down from where she had pushed it back from her face during the night. Adam came in at first light to check on Helena. He stood in the doorway for a moment. Charlotte did not stir. He crossed to Helena's side of the bed, checked her breathing, adjusted the blanket. Then he turned and looked at Charlotte in the chair, her head tipped slightly to one side, her hands loose in her lap, her hair coming down across her shoulder. And he removed his own coat without making a sound, and laid it carefully across her shoulders, and left before she stirred. Charlotte woke to find the coat folded across her lap. She sat with it for a moment, her hands on the wool. Then she stood, moved to the chair across the room, and placed it there precisely folded, smoothed flat, as though it had been set down by someone who had not thought about it. She said nothing about it to Adam. She said nothing about it to Helena. Helena, who had not been as deeply asleep as she appeared, said nothing either. On a Tuesday afternoon, after the physician had gone and his footsteps had receded down the gravel drive, Helena asked Charlotte to close the door. "I know who you are," Helena said. She said it simply, without preamble, the way she said most things that mattered. "I recognized you from a miniature on the day you arrived. I have known the whole time." Charlotte sat without speaking. "I'm not going to explain the codicil," Helena continued. "That is not mine to explain. What I want to tell you is this." She folded her hands over the blanket. Her hands were thin now, in a way they had not been in September. "I am dying. The physician gives me perhaps 2 months, which means perhaps 6 weeks, because physicians are optimists by professional necessity. I would like those weeks to be honest ones." Charlotte looked at the window. The frost-edged garden was visible through the glass, the stone walls dark with damp, the last of the autumn color gone. "I arranged the agency placement," Helena said. Charlotte looked back at her. "I know that was not my right," Helena said. "I did it anyway. I have been thinking about you for 2 years, about a woman I had never met, who I had reason to be grateful to and reason to grieve for in equal measure. And I wanted to know you before I was no longer in a position to know anyone." She paused. "I am asking you to stay. Not as a companion in the hired sense. As someone I would like to call my friend, if you are willing." Charlotte stood. She walked to the window. She stood looking out at the frost-edged garden for approximately 1 full minute. And she was aware of her own breathing and the fire behind her and the particular quality of Helena's silence, which was the silence of someone who had said what they needed to say, and was now waiting with genuine patience for whatever came next. Then she turned back. She sat down. She picked up the book she had set aside when Helena began to speak. The volume of travel essays, still open to the page where they had left off. She began to read. She read until the lamp needed trimming. Helena did not speak again, and Charlotte did not confirm that she was staying, or confirm that she forgave the arrangement, or offer any accounting of herself at all. She simply read, and Helena listened. And by the end of the chapter, something between them had shifted from the category of employment into a different category that did not yet have a name, but was moving toward one. From that evening, Charlotte stayed later than her contracted hours required. Helena declined rapidly over the following 3 weeks. The intervals of clarity grew shorter, and the intervals of difficult breathing longer. And Charlotte's days compressed into a small and exhausting routine that left no room for anything that was not immediately necessary. Medicines at the prescribed hours, meals carried up from the kitchen, windows opened in the morning, closed against the afternoon chill. The physician twice weekly, his visits growing longer and his departures quieter. Adam, no longer able to maintain his absence from the wing, was present more often, sitting on the far side of Helena's bed in the evenings, reviewing estate papers in the armchair by the fire, speaking to Charlotte briefly and practically about Helena's care in the corridor outside the room. The three of them settled into a shared vigil that held together without requiring conversation to do so. Then, Lady Carstairs arrived. She came on a Wednesday morning, unannounced, with a traveling carriage and a lady's maid, and the particular confidence of a woman who had never in her life needed to announce herself. She was an old friend of Adam's late mother. Charlotte learned this from the housekeeper's expression when Lady Carstairs swept into the entrance hall, an expression that combined deference and apprehension in equal measure. Charlotte was crossing the entrance hall when Lady Carstairs arrived. She had come downstairs to collect a book from the library, and had not anticipated company. Lady Carstairs saw her from 12 feet away, and stopped walking. She looked at Charlotte with the specific look of a woman who has placed a face and found the placement displeasing, and she turned her back with the full deliberate weight of a social cut. Not an oversight, not a failure of recognition, but a statement. She turned to Adam, who had come down to receive her, and said, in a voice that did not lower itself for the servants in the hall, "Adam, how could you permit that woman under your dying wife's roof?" Before Adam could speak, and Charlotte could see from where she stood that he was drawing breath to speak, that whatever he was about to say was not going to be gentle. A sound came from the top of the staircase. Helena was standing at the top of the stairs. She had come down in defiance of the physician's instructions, one hand on the banister, wearing her dressing gown and her dignity in approximately equal measure, and she was looking at Lady Carstairs with an expression that Charlotte had not seen on Helena's face before, and hoped never to see directed at herself. "Lady Carstairs," Helena said. Her voice carried through the entire hall with a clarity that had nothing to do with volume and everything to do with intention. "Miss Beresford is my companion by my personal choice and my personal invitation. I requested her specifically. I arranged and paid for her placement myself." She paused. "Anyone who finds that arrangement objectionable is welcome to express that objection on their way out." Lady Carstairs' mouth opened. "The carriage has not yet been unhitched," Helena added. Lady Carstairs left within 10 minutes. The hall was very quiet after the sound of the carriage wheels on gravel faded. Then Charlotte looked up at the staircase and saw that Helena's legs had given slightly. A barely perceptible shift of weight. A tightening of the hand on the banister that meant the descent was no longer under full control. Charlotte moved. Adam moved. They reached the foot of the staircase at the same moment and went up together without speaking. And when they reached Helena, they each took a side. Charlotte's arm around Helena's waist, Adam's arm taking her other side and most of her weight. and they carried her back up the stairs together, with Helena's arms around both of them and her head slightly bowed. It was the first time Charlotte and Adam had touched each other since the rehearsal at St. George's, Hanover Square, 3 years ago, when he had briefly placed his hand over hers to adjust her grip on a borrowed prayer book. The last time he had touched her with intention. She was aware of his arm, the warmth of it, the fact of it, in the way you are aware of a thing you have been not thinking about for 3 years and have suddenly run out of ways to avoid. Helena, her arms around both of them, closed her eyes. 10 days before the end, Helena asked to be taken outside. "Once more," she said. "Only once more. I want to see the garden." It was a cold morning, the sky low and white, the walled garden silver with frost at the edges of the stone. Adam carried her. Charlotte had not anticipated this, the particular ease with which he did it, the way Helena rested her head against his shoulder without self-consciousness. And Charlotte walked beside them, with a folded blanket over her arm, her breath visible in the cold air. They settled Helena into the garden chair, and Charlotte unfolded the blanket and began to tuck it around her legs, and Adam reached across from the other side to help, and their hands met in the wool. Neither pulled back immediately. The moment lasted perhaps 3 seconds, long enough to be a moment, short enough to be deniable. Helena had her eyes closed against the thin winter sun. She did not open them. 2 weeks later, Helena died in the night. Adam was on one side of the bed, and Charlotte was on the other. And the room smelled of lavender water and the low fire and the particular stillness that settles into a room when the person in it has been fighting for a long time and has finally stopped fighting. Near the end, Helena lifted her hand, not toward Adam, but toward Charlotte. Charlotte took it. She felt Helena's fingers close around hers with a grip that was weaker than it had been a month ago and stronger than it had been yesterday. And then Helena drew their joined hands across her own body and held them there. Adam's hand beneath Charlotte's hand, beneath Helena's hand, and held them until she was gone. After, they remained seated on opposite sides of the bed. Neither moved. The fire burned lower. The night outside the window went from black to the dark gray that comes before dawn. Charlotte was aware of Adam's hand still joined with hers across the still body between them. And she did not move. And he did not move. And neither of them was willing to be the first to release what Helena had placed there. In the morning, Charlotte went to Adam in the library. She was dressed for travel, her coat buttoned, her bag in her hand. "I'm leaving," she said. He was standing by the cold fireplace. He looked at her for a moment with an expression she did not try to read. "Stay," he said. The word came out without architecture, not a request constructed with care. But the single word itself, raw and slightly desperate, and not at all what a duke was supposed to sound like. "I cannot," Charlotte said. He crossed to the desk and took a sealed envelope from the drawer and held it out to her. "The solicitor's address," he said. "Come when you're summoned. That's all I'm asking. Only that." She took the envelope. She left within the hour. The 6 weeks that followed were the valley of the story. Charlotte in Bath, in a furnished room she had rented on the day she arrived back and could barely remember choosing, moving through her days with the careful, deliberate attention of someone who has decided that grief requires management the way a household requires management. Not suppressed, but scheduled, given its hour and then set aside. She grieved Helena. She was surprised by how much she grieved Helena, and surprised that the surprise surprised her, because she had known from the beginning what the work would cost and had told herself she was prepared for it. She did not know what to do with Adam. He was not dead. She could not grieve him. He was present in the city of her mind in a way that had no available category, and she left him there, unresolved, while she attended to the things she could attend to. Adam did not write. He honored her silence, as she had asked him to. She was not certain whether this made things better or worse. 2 months after the funeral, a letter arrived from the family solicitor of the Wycombe estate, requesting Miss Beresford's presence at Wycombe Hall regarding a small bequest from the late Duchess. The letter named a date and an hour. It named the estate chapel. Charlotte arrived at the chapel at the hour specified, expecting the solicitor. The solicitor was not there. The chapel was small and very cold, the stone walls holding the frost of the night before, her breath visible in the air before her face. Helena was buried in the churchyard outside. Charlotte had known this from the solicitor's letter, and she had paused at the grave before entering, and she had stood there for a moment with nothing adequate to say, and had said nothing. Adam was standing by the stone altar with a sealed envelope in his hands. He gave it to her without speaking. He turned away and looked at the altar while she broke the seal, and he did not watch her read. The letter was in Helena's hand. Charlotte recognized the handwriting from the notes Helena had left on her reading table, the particular slant of it, the precision of the letter forms. The letter was several pages. It contained the full text of the codicil, copied in Helena's hand from the legal document. It contained a timeline of events leading to the broken engagement. The uncle's name, her father's name, the 500 tenants on the Wycombe estates, the single night Adam had been given to make a choice that could not be undone. It contained every name. It contained the shape of the thing clearly, without softening. At the bottom of the final page, in a hand that was slightly less steady than the rest of the letter, written later, Charlotte understood, written when writing had become more difficult, was a single sentence. I asked him not to come for you while I was alive. He kept that promise too. Now release him from it or do not. But know everything before you choose. Charlotte read the letter to the end. Then she read it again, from the beginning. The chapel was very quiet. Outside, a bird moved in the churchyard yew, and the sound of it was loud in the silence. She folded the letter. She placed it in her coat pocket. She faced Adam. He turned. He looked at her with an expression that had rehearsed nothing. She could see that clearly, the way you can see when a person has prepared for every outcome and is now standing in the one they didn't prepare for, which was her silence. I am not ready, Charlotte said. He opened his mouth. Let me finish, she said. Not harshly, precisely. Knowing why does not undo 3 years of believing I was found wanting. I have thought about that morning at St. George's every day for 3 years. Not every hour. I'm not going to pretend I was destroyed by it. Because I wasn't. I rebuilt myself, and I am proud of what I built. But I thought about it every day. I thought about what it meant that you looked at me and chose to say nothing. I built my understanding of myself on that. And the understanding was wrong. But the 3 years were real, and I cannot simply set them aside because Helena has explained the arithmetic. Adam said nothing. His throat worked once, a tightening visible beneath the skin, the effort of a man holding back words that had nowhere yet to go. I will not become a consolation prize, Charlotte said. Not even for a woman I loved. Not even for a grace as generous as hers. That is not what I am, and it is not what I will accept. She met his eyes. If you are the man Helena's letter describes, the man who chose 500 tenants over his own happiness and kept silence for 3 years because telling the truth would have required me to refuse my own protection. Then you will let me go. You will not follow me. You will wait." She walked out of the chapel. She walked across the churchyard. She passed Helena's grave without stopping because she could not stop, not yet. She reached the carriage. She got in. Adam stood at the altar and did not follow. He did not follow her across the churchyard. He did not follow her to the carriage. He stood in the cold chapel with the empty envelope in his hands and let her go. 2 months after the chapel, on a gray February morning, Charlotte sat at her writing desk in the Bath lodging room and wrote Adam Wycombe a single brief letter. She told him she was granting him 1 hour in Bath at a time she named, on a day she named. She told him she was not promising anything beyond the hour. She sealed it and posted it before she could reconsider. He came. He arrived at the river path at the hour she specified, in plain clothes, without a carriage, on foot from the inn where he had taken a room the night before. Charlotte was already there. They fell into step without greeting, walking east along the water, and the river was pale in the morning light, and the path was mostly empty at that hour. Charlotte spoke first. "I have read Helena's letter many times," she said. "I know it by memory now. I have thought about what she did, arranging the placement, keeping what she knew, deciding that her last weeks were the moment to set something right. I've been angry about it. I have also been grateful, and I find I cannot separate the two. So I have stopped trying." Adam walked beside her. He did not speak. "What I want," Charlotte said, "is not to be restored to what I was at 28. That woman trusted a situation she had not examined closely enough, and I don't say that to blame her. I say it because I am not her anymore. What I want is to be seen as what I am now. Not rescued, not compensated. Seen." They reached a bend in the path where the river curved and the willows grew close to the bank, and Charlotte stopped walking. She turned to him. She looked at him, at his face, which she had spent 4 months not looking at for longer than a sentence required, and which she now looked at with full deliberation. And she kissed him. Once, slowly, with the specific intention of a woman who has decided something and is acting on the decision. His hands came up to her arms, not pulling her closer, just holding, the way you hold something you have been afraid to touch in case it isn't real. She stepped back. "I am not ready to marry you," she said. "I want you to know that I am not saying this to punish you. I am saying it because it is true, and I have decided to say true things." "I know," Adam said. He said it simply, without the articulate precision of a man who has composed his response. "I know that." He looked at her, and she could see him searching for words that were not coming in the right order, and she found she did not mind. "I'll wait," he said. "I've been waiting 3 years. I know how." "All right," Charlotte said. She walked back to her lodgings alone. He stood on the river path and watched her go. 8 months of letters followed. Real ones, written at desks and by lamplight, and sometimes in the early morning before the day had made its demands. They wrote about the 3 years they had not shared with each other. Charlotte wrote about the lodging houses and the widows she had sat with, and the particular loneliness of arriving at a new house and having to learn every room from scratch. Adam wrote about the estates and the tenants and the years of Helena's illness, and the specific texture of a silence kept so long it had become part of the architecture of his days. Neither asked the other to apologize for surviving. Neither offered an accounting of their grief, as though grief were a debt that required settling. They simply told each other what had happened. And the telling was the thing, and the letters grew longer as the months passed and shorter again in the 9th month, when brevity meant something different than distance. In the 9th month, Charlotte wrote to say she was ready. The ceremony took place at dawn in the estate chapel where Helena was buried. The same cold stone space, the same frost on the walls, their breath visible in the early morning air. A vicar, Adam's steward, who had been with the family for 20 years and received the invitation with the particular composure of a man who had suspected this was coming for some time. Helena's elderly mother, who had traveled from Dorset and who took Charlotte's hands before the ceremony and held them for a moment and said nothing, which was the right thing. Charlotte wore plain gray. Adam wore his mourning pin still on his lapel. The vows were spoken quietly in the cold stone space, without performance, in voices that were steady because they had earned their steadiness. Afterward, Charlotte stood for a moment at Helena's grave in the churchyard. She did not speak. She did not need to. She simply stood in the early light with the frost on the grass around her feet. And then she turned and walked back to where Adam was waiting at the chapel door. That evening, Wycombe Hall showed 2 lamps lit in the windows of the small east wing. The wing Charlotte had chosen herself, separate from the room where Helena died, a room that was hers and would be theirs and had no history to carry. A door closed. The hall was quiet. In the morning, at the writing desk by the window, Charlotte opened her correspondence case and took out 2 sheets of paper. On the first, she began a letter to the bath agency, brief and courteous, releasing her position and thanking them for 3 years of placement. She signed it with her full name, which was a different name now, and she felt the difference without sentiment, simply as a fact, the way she felt most true things, as something that had arrived and could be acknowledged. She set that letter aside to dry. On the second sheet of paper, on a fresh page, she dipped her pen and wrote the first line of a journal she had not kept in 3 years. I have begun again. Not where I was, but where I am. She looked at the line for a moment. Then she set the pen in the tray, folded her hands on the desk, and looked out the window at the frost-edged park in the early morning light. The trees bare and still, the sky just beginning to hold the pale winter sun, and the whole of the day ahead of her, unhurried and entirely her own.